Britain has entirely lost its moral compass under this government. Because what the British government should be doing is backing up and justifying Israel in what is a war of absolute clarity for most right-thinking people. And I think this government's showing that they don't really mean that at all, because they're doing whatever they can to signal that they don't really have Israel's back.
We're so honored to have in our studio today a friend, an incredible broadcaster and journalist, Jonathan Sacerdoti. Thank you for being with us all the way from London.
Thanks for having me.
Jonathan, you've really been in the UK and also around the world, but mainly in the UK, in the forefront of the fight for the war of words in pro-Israel in a very hostile environment, which has become in the UK. We've had, in the middle of all of this, a change of government. And I just wanted to get a sense from you. Have things gotten worse? Are things getting better? Are there people waking up? What's going on in the UK?
Well, I've been talking about Israel in the UK media and world media for years. And generally speaking, that part of my work would perk up, let's say, when there's bad news here. And that would be every few years when there was a war or terrorism. I would get a lot of activity to do with those things in the news. Now, of course, what's happened is that this war is like no other that I think any of us have known in Israel's history, certainly in our lifetimes. And so it's become massive news again. If the world had got a bit tired of recurring wars and terrorism in Israel, it certainly rediscovered its interest. And I would say that what we're seeing now, for me, is very familiar, because the anti-Israel feeling that's peaked at the moment has been something that I am used to from previous wars, and yet it's got to this sort of roaring boil. And I think that is visible for anyone who's followed Israel for a long time. It's certainly something that Jews feel across the world. And I think suddenly all the things that maybe we let go before, we thought, well, that's just how they are when they cover Israel. Now we've realized the danger of having done that. And I will say that you mentioned that I'm a pro-Israel voice. I am proudly pro-Israel, but I think that I'm that as a journalist and analyst, not because I'm Jewish or because I'm somehow biased about Israel, but because actually I've always tried to give a fair and honest view of what's happening in Israel. And because of my connections in Israel, I've also been able to bring extra information and quality information and analysis, which is different from a lot of people who would talk on the topic, but actually don't have very much insight or knowledge or have good sources here. And as a result, what I think of as balanced and fair and reasonable coverage to many people looks like pro-Israel coverage. I would say that were I not Jewish, I imagine I would feel exactly the same way with my personality about Israel and this war in particular. But of course, it's impossible for me to say that, because part of my personality is that I'm Jewish, and that I suppose I have this defined sense of right and wrong, partly as a result of all the calumnies about Israel.
So has the mainstream media, do you think, in the UK, I mean, we know what happened last week, the Assassin report, have they lost their moral compass? I mean, we have just now people feeling bad for Hezbollah operatives whose beepers blew up, people blaming Israel for war crimes, for targeting in the most surgical way terrorists. And it seems like everything's turned upside down.
I would say not just the British media or Western media, but the whole world seems to be losing its moral compass. It's a great example to look at what happened with the pagers and mobile devices in Lebanon. Because if you think about it, for the last 11 months, Israel has been criticized unfairly for supposedly or allegedly breaking international law, humanitarian law, for starving Gazan Palestinians, for not giving enough effort to try and save civilians within Gaza, even though Hamas are embedded within them in that fight. And in fact, anybody that looks at these things knows that Israel has gone above and beyond what most Western armies have done. Even people like John McCall, who came from, he's a former supreme NATO military leader, went into Gaza. He said he was very skeptical before he got there.
He said that, didn't he?
Exactly.
He came to look for the crime.
And he said that he left with absolutely an appreciation of how far Israel did actually go. to do the right things. But so if we look at that's been going on for the last year, and we think how Israel was criticized for apparently being indiscriminate, supposedly indiscriminate in its strikes in Gaza. And then we look at this, I would say, exceptionally bold action, which has been attributed to Israel in Lebanon, where these paging devices have exploded, taking out, we don't know how many Hezbollah
They won't admit it.
Exactly.
But thousands, let's say.
I think, and unlike the Gaza health authorities, they want to play down the numbers.
Yeah.
Because why do they want to play down these numbers? Because they know full well that the whole world knows that the people who had those pagers and devices attached to their bodies were actually
terrorists.
Hezbollah operative terrorists.
Absolutely.
Now, the British media constantly calls them militants rather than terrorists.
Right.
We're going through that whole thing again.
Yeah.
We spent months trying to get them to call Hamas terrorists, and now we have the same thing with Hezbollah. And I'll say this, if you could imagine a world in which you could get every single person in a terrorist organization to have an ID card of their membership of that organization, and then those were the only people you targeted, and you could effectively take out a huge number of them in an ongoing war where those very people have been responsible for an absolutely unjustified, unprovoked attack over months of thousands of rockets, when they have a stated aim of continually attacking you.
100,000 evacuees in our country.
I have a magic wand that can strike only those people with that ID card.
Yeah.
You would say, well, that has to be the most discriminate, most legitimate method of war I could think of. And that's what Israel has done in this action, if indeed Israel does say that it did this. I think we all perhaps have a suspicion. And I will say that to now see the criticism of that as an illegitimate piece of warfare just puts the truth out there that these people aren't actually concerned about the numbers of combatants to civilians. They aren't concerned about targeting and legitimate strikes. They're literally just concerned with attacking the state of Israel for defending itself. And the reason that there is an ongoing conflict with Hezbollah is because Hezbollah has for years been breaking the UN rules that say it should be north of the Litani River in Lebanon. That's why Israel has not retaliated for years. They even built, before October the 7th, tents over the Blue Line.
That's right.
On Israeli territory. This is how much Hezbollah has provoked Israel. And Israel has been committed to diplomacy for such a long time with UNIFIL troops, UN troops, trusted international troops in keeping the peace, peacekeeping troops.
Yeah.
Well, what peace did they keep when we know that Hezbollah has broken 1701? They have broken all the rules. They are in the south of Lebanon. They have their rockets aimed at Israel. They have a massive supply of rockets compared to Hamas.
10 times more.
And we know that they have been launching those rockets, thousands and thousands of those rockets. People are evacuated from their homes in the north of Israel. And what do we see in the British and Western media? We see criticism of Israel for targeted surgical strikes, and now for this extremely impressive, extremely
impressive,
almost unthinkable strike, which has taken out senior Hezbollah operatives. And the other thing it's done, which I think is also interesting, I read Jeremy Bowen's report on the BBC.
Yeah, how was that?
So
he had a special mention in the Assassin report, didn't he?
In his written report on the BBC website was a moment where he said, Lebanon is a small country. Hezbollah will pick themselves up and they'll be able to communicate by hand. It was almost like he was wishing it to be true, that taking out the secret direct communications of this terrorist organization might be debilitating to them. And he mentioned, of course, the Iranian ambassador who had been injured in this.
Yeah.
Didn't question in that article why he was carrying a Hezbollah pager. But of course, again, that will be useful information to viewers and readers who don't necessarily know a lot about the region to understand fully that Iran is completely pulling the strings of Hezbollah. It is arming it, it's funding it, it's getting it to point its weapons towards Israel, it's getting it to attack Israel. And British viewers of the BBC are being robbed of a full knowledge of what's going on because he failed to explain that.
It's really actually quite incredible. And, when you even look at the UN and Guterres, who says, oh, how disturbing what's happened in Lebanon, but won't say anything about his own UN resolution that has been breached for the last 15 years, the 1701, it's just beggars belief. So what's going on with the British government? Because since the new government's come in, we've had UNRWA reestablished funding by the British government. They cancelled some licenses. Of course, they're not going to make a difference in the end of this war, or if it doesn't end. But why? What are they doing? Are they pandering to the Islamists in their country? What's going on?
Yesterday, I went to the headquarters of the IAI, who are making the drones, which Israel is leading the world in the creation of and is using to some success as well in the current engagements. And I asked them about these 30 arms parts and licenses embargo, effectively, that Britain has put in place. Now, they don't want to talk about that. They said, you know what, we will cope.
Of course.
And I think that's the answer, because when you talk to anyone here at any high level, they will tell you this isn't going to make a great difference in terms of practicalities. But what it does do is it sends a very clear signal to British people, to Israeli people, to terrorists, not just in the Middle East, not just Hamas, not just Hezbollah, but around the world, to Russia and to Iran. It sends a very clear signal that Britain has entirely lost its moral compass under this government. Because what the British government should be doing is backing up and justifying Israel in what is a war of absolute clarity for most right-thinking people. We can see that this is a country responding to an attempted genocide on October the 7th, 2023. This is a country which is fighting for its survival. This is a country defending Jewish people who underwent the most vicious, most brutal, most bloodthirsty attack on Jews since the Holocaust. When we all say never again, it's become such a cliche. And I think this government's showing that they don't really mean that at all, because they're doing whatever they can to signal that they don't really have Israel's back, whether it's refunding UNRWA, which has been entirely compromised by the years of work that people like Hillel Neuer at UN Watch has done, never mind just in the last year, showing its corruption by Hamas connections. UNRWA and Hamas are inextricably linked.
Absolutely.
And it's bizarre that Britain and other Western countries are determined to keep bolstering this rotten, corrupt UN body, which is, I would say now, a fundamental part of the problem, not at all a part of the solution. And that Britain has placed this partial arms embargo is a cowardly and pathetic move. I was outside the Foreign Office speaking at a rally about this, and I would say that this government, sadly, has shown that it's made up of intellectual pygmies who have no moral backbone in doing the right thing by their ally, Israel. Israel is fighting this war not just for its own survival, but for the West. It's fighting against barbarism. It's fighting for Western values. And this will come back to haunt countries like Britain and even other Western countries. If they can't now show that they're on the right side of this, this is going to be something that they bitterly regret.
Jonathan, you and I have spoken about that this is really, we're at a crossroads, I think, in civilization, if you think about it. And we spoke about the 1930s in Germany. Where would you stand? Where is everyone? And I truly feel it, and I feel like the world is blind. How can we make them open their eyes, or is it too late for the UK?
On an emotional level, I really feel like we are in uncharted territory from my lifetime. And so we do reach for comparisons. And I do think about what it must have been like for Jews and non-Jews in pre-war Germany and around Europe. And then during the war, people who did the right thing and people who didn't do the right thing.
Yeah.
And then the people in between who stood silently.
Yeah.
Now, I have a personal connection, as many Jews do. My late father was saved by Catholics in Florence, in Italy. As a child, he was hidden for 9 months in a Catholic orphanage. And those wonderful people, I've been back to meet their successors, and those people are responsible for my existence on this planet.
Wow.
I see it as vital that at times like this, when a light is shone on a situation like the one we're facing, everybody needs to ask themselves whether they feel they have some kind of interest in this or not. Where do I stand in this battle? Where do I stand in the world when I'm called on to give my opinion and my actions to try and make things better? And I think that so many people at the moment are sadly failing in that question. But I don't think it's too late. And I'm also enormously, enormously reassured and heartened when I meet people who aren't Jewish or Israeli.
Yeah.
And they do stand up for Israel at this important time. And I'll say that, unfortunately, without wanting to be party political, the new Labour government in the UK is failing badly on this. Within just a few months of coming into power, they're sending such clear signals to the whole world that they aren't quite on the right side of this. I think there's time for them to claw it back. But I think that they're really sending a very clear message that they aren't of sound moral clarity on this matter. They need to be. The same applies to all Western countries. I think that Israel is facing an enemy that has declared it has a genocidal intent towards not just this state, but towards the Jewish people. There are two visions of the Middle East, as I see it, that are playing out before us. And one of them is of a Middle East that has Arab countries, Muslim countries that can comprehend of a Middle East where a Jewish state is allowed to exist.
Well, we saw the example of the Abraham Accords. We see the Sunni moderate countries that are actually helping Israel in a way.
And that was such a moment of optimism for those of us who saw it happening. And of course, in a way, it triggered what happened on October the 7th.
100%.
But this is the moment when the West needs to say, whose side are we on in that?
Exactly.
Are we on the side of the Arab Muslim countries in the Middle East who want to wipe out the small Jewish state? Or are we on the side of the extremely important Arab Muslim countries who say, actually, we want to embrace that. We have a vision of the Middle East where we can coexist and flourish and trade with each other and strengthen each other against those very forces, the Shia extremists, the tyrannical theocratic regime of Iran, which has a countdown clock, literal countdown clock to the end of Israel.
Yeah.
This is how clear they are about what they want to do to us, about what they want to do to the West. Death to America, death to Israel, the big Satan, the little Satan.
Yeah, all our values.
All of us and all of our values. This is a prime moment for everyone, in my opinion, to show where they stand. And it's so clear which side is the side that's correct, the side of right, the side of morality, the side that is ethical, the side that really points the way to a future that we can all enjoy, rather than a future that some of them, I think, are terrified of. And that might be why at the moment they're faltering and at the moment they prefer to try to sit on this fence, but that will not work. You can't appease this kind of horror and barbarism.
The question is whether the UK demographically can still manage, because we know that there's a lot of peace-loving Muslims in the UK, but the extremists are the ones setting the agenda, making the noise. Are there enough moderate Muslims and the rest of us who understand what's going on here to be able to save the UK? Because I'm worried.
It's interesting because in this last general election, we ended up with a very unusual result where, along with the Labour victory, we had 5 independent MPs who basically ran on a
anti-immigration
ticket. No, not them.
Oh.
So we had those. That's interesting. But we have a caucus which is effectively the same size as the Reform UK anti-immigration caucus.
Right.
They're grouped together as a party, but we have 5 independents who stood and often won against Labour MPs, and they really stood on what they called the Muslim vote. There was a campaign called the Muslim vote to help people vote in independent candidates who they said stood up for Gaza. Now, what we mean by Gaza isn't actually Gaza. It is really, it was a dog whistle for a certain kind of Islamist intention, in my opinion. Now, they've now all grouped together along with another independent called Jeremy Corbyn.
Of course.
And so we effectively have within Parliament now something as close to a political Islamic party as Britain has ever known.
Wow.
Which can vote in that way on relevant issues. So in answer to your question, is it too late? Well, I believe it isn't too late, but I do feel like this is a tipping point. And I'm not somebody that's said that many times in my life.
Yeah, you're not dramatic.
I try not to be, but I think that this is the moment that we need to get it right. Because in the past, we can make mistakes and they're savable. But I think right now, Britain is on a very tight wire. and one sheikh could have us fall off. I think it's important now that this government should realize what Israel's fight means, not just for Israel, but for the whole world, for the West, and for our own politics. And to give in to the face of extremism on British streets, to give in to the face of extremism in Israel, on the Gaza border, in the north, on the border with Lebanon, it's a fatal mistake for the whole West. We need to be bold. We need to be clear. We need to remember that our values are worth protecting. It's always fascinating for me coming here. I come very often. I have personal connections here as well as work connections. But every single time I come back to Israel, especially since October the 7th, there is this wave of common sense that I find envelops me. And it's just to say that people are so clear because they have to be. You're in the middle of a massive war against people who are very clear about what their intentions are. There was no doubt about what they were trying to do on October the 7th. When people drove through the streets of London a couple of years ago with PLO, Palestinian flags on their cars, a convoy of 7 or 8 cars, they'd driven down from Bradford, and they said, F the Jews, F their mothers,
rape their daughters.
Rape their daughters.
Yeah.
Those people have never been charged or put in prison. Now, on October the 7th, 2023, what did the Palestinian terrorists who burst across the border do? They effed the Jews.
Yeah.
They effed their mothers.
Yeah.
They raped their daughters. And I'm sorry to
kill their children.
To not say the words because I want to, but I know that online these things can get us in trouble. And I think it's important that as many people as possible can hear that. Because when people tell you what they want to do,
believe them.
You should believe them.
Yeah.
You should at least listen to them. And I don't believe that those people that drove through London, through areas with big Jewish populations, did that metaphorically or did that as a manner of speech. I think they were very clear about what they threatened. And at a time when this government is putting people directly into jail quicker than you can blink, because they have said online very bad things about immigrants or about Muslims, there is no getting away from the fact that Jewish people or people who just have a clear mind about these things can see that was never done in our defense. That was never done in defense of Western values. It's not done for everybody equally.
I completely agree. And the saddest thing, and then maybe we'll close with this, is that Britain saved the world before. That was Churchill when he faced Nazi ideology. And I just feel kind of sad and depressed that Britain is not waking up to the current civilizational threat and may even contribute to the downfall of that civilization.
Well, I share that fear, and I would say that thank God this time there is a state that is standing up for civilization and for the values that we should all fight for, and that's this state here in Israel. And I believe that Israel's allies will come round to realize that this fight is all of our fight.
I hope that you're right. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for being with us.